Okay, we were only going to read one chapter, but we're to pot with that, okay? We're reading chapter number 2 now, and chapter number 2 is called Ida Mayhew. What is the matter, Van? You remind me of a certain horned beast that has seen a red flag, said Ike Stanton, linking his arm in that of Van Berg's. An apt illustration. I've been baited and irritated for the last 20 minutes. I thought you enjoyed Beethoven's music, and surely Thomas rendered it divinely tonight. That is one of the chief of my grievances. I have not been able to hear a note, was the wrathful response. That's strange, said Stanton with mock gravity. Were I not afraid you would take it amiss, I would hint that your ears are of a goodly size. How comes it that they have so suddenly failed you? Having seen your dinner, you have no eyes for anything else. If you had, you would have seen a face near us. Oh, I saw a score of faces near us. A German had one with the area of an acre. Was he the one who said hissed like a blast from the north? From a porpoise, rather, yeah. Did you observe the girl, towards whom his gusty rebuke was directed? Yes, yeah, an inoffensive young lady. Inoffensive? Indeed, interrupted Van Berg. She's put me into purgatory. Ooh, you do seem quite ablaze. Well, you see, you are not the first one that she has put there. But really, Van, I did not know that you were so inflammable. If you had any instincts of an artist, you would know that I am inflamed with no gentler feeling than anger. Why? What has that poor child done to you? She is not a child. She knows too much about some things. Well, I have no doubt she is better than either you or I, said Stanton sharply. That fact would be far from proving her a saint. Well, what the dickens makes you so vindictive against the girl? Because she has the features of an angel and the face of a fool. What business has a woman to mock and disappoint one so? When I first saw her, I thought I had discovered a prize, a new revelation of beauty. But a moment later, she looked so ineffably silly that I felt as if I had bitten into okay, I gotta say this right because this is great. But a moment later, she looked so ineffably silly that I felt as if I had bitten into an apple of Sodom. Of course, the girl is nothing to me. I never saw her before, and I hope I may never see her again. But her features were so perfect that I could not help looking at them, and the more I looked, the more annoyed I became to find that, instead of being blended together into divine face by the mind within, they were the reluctant slaves of as piccanine a soul as ever maintained its microscopic existence in a human body. It is exasperating to think what that face might be, and to see it as it is. How can nature make such an absurd blunder? The idea of building so fair a temple for such an ugly little divinity. Whoa, man, I thought you artists were satisfied with flesh and blood women, if only put together in a way pleasing to your fastidious eyes. If nature had designed that woman should consist only of flesh and blood women, one should have to be content, but no one save the unspeakable Turk believes in such a woman, or wants her. Who admires such a fragment of a woman save the man that is as yet undeveloped beyond the animal? My mother is my friend, my companion, my inspiration. The idea of a yonder silly creature being the companion of a man? Good evening, coz, said a voice that was a trifle shrill and loud for a public place, and looking up, the friends saw the subject of their conversation, who, with her spindling attendant, was also taking a promenade. Stanton raised his hat with a smile, while Van Berg touched his but coldly. I wish to speak to you, she said in passing. I will join you soon, Stanton answered. So, this lady is your cousin? Remarked Van Berg. She is, Stanton said, laughing. You will do me the justice to remember that I spoke in ignorance of the fact. If I were you, though, I would give her some cousinly advice. Bless you, I have, but it's like pouring water on a duck's back. For one sensible word I can say to her, she gets 1,000 compliments from rich and empty-headed young fools, like the one now with her, who will eventually be worth $500,000 in his own name. I was interested to see how her face would strike you, and I imagine that your estimate... Okay, well, it's hit pretty close upon the truth. For in my judgment, she is the prettiest and silliest girl in New York. She has recently returned from a year's absence abroad, and I was in hopes that she would find something to remember besides her own handsome face. But I imagine she has seen little else than it, and the admiring glances with which everywhere follow her, so... Take us as we average, Van. Mr. Darwin has not got us very far along yet. Oh, this guy, I don't know why he's always quoting him, because it's funny, because he doesn't really believe it, but... And if the face of a woman suits us, we are apt to stare at it as far as such politeness as we possess permits, without giving much thought to her intellectual, endowments. So, when it comes to companionship, however, I agree with you. Heaven help the man who is tied to such a woman for life. Still... In the fashionable crowd my cousin trains with, this makes little difference. The husband goes his way, and the wife goes hers, and they are not long in getting a good ways apart. But come, let me introduce you. I've always thought the little fool had some fine gold mingled with her dross, and you are such a skillful analyst that perhaps you will discover it. No, I thank you, said Van Berg, with a slight expression of disgust. I could not speak civilly to a lady that I had just seen giggling and flirting through one of Beethoven's finest symphonies. Well, said Stanton, laughing, I'm rather glad to find one man who is not drawn to her pretty face like a moth to a candle. I will join you by and by. Van Berg sat down in one of the little stalls that stood open to the main promenade, and saw his friend thread his way among the moving figures, and address his cousin. As she turned to speak with Stanton, the artist received again that vivid impression of beauty which her face ever caused before time was given for closer scrutiny. Indeed, from his somewhat distant point of observation, and in the less searching light, the fatal flaw could scarcely be detected. Her affected tones and silly words could not be heard, and he saw only dark, lustrous eyes lighting up features that were almost a revelation even to him, with his artistic familiarity with beauty. If I could always keep her at about that distance, he muttered, and arrange the light and shadows in which to view her face, I could not ask for a better study, for she would give me a basis of perfect beauty. And if I could add any expression of characteristic that I desired, and now he fastened his eyes as a compensation, in part, for the annoyance she had caused him in the glare of the audience-room. He soon saw a frown lower upon her hitherto laughing face, like the shadow of a passing cloud, and it was evident that something had been said that was not really agreeable to her vanity. A moment or two after Stanton had joined the young lady, her escort for the evening had excused himself for a brief time, and had left the cousins together. She had then asked, I say, Ike, who was that gentleman you were talking with? Oh, he's an old friend of mine. He's not an old friend of anyone. He is young and quite good-looking, or rather, he has a certain distinguished air that makes one look at him twice. Who is he? Oh, he's an artist, and if he lives and works as he is now doing, though through an ordinary lifetime, he will indeed be distinguished. In fact, he stands high already. How nice, she exclaimed. Oh, he has another characteristic which you will appreciate far more than anything he will ever accomplish with his brush. He is very rich. Why? He is perfectly splendid. Who ever heard of such a strange, rare creature? I've flirted with lots of poor artists, but never with a rich one. Bring him to me and introduce him at once. He's not one that you can flirt with, like that attenuated youth that just meandered to the barroom. Why not? If you had eyes for anything save your own pretty face, and the public stare, you'd have seen that my friend is not a creature, but a man. Come, Cousin Ike, she replied in more natural tones. Too much of your house is made of glass for you to throw stones. Flirting and frolicking are as good any day as eating, smoking, and dawdling. Stanton bit his lip, but retorted, I don't profess to be a bit better than you are, cuz, but I at least have the sense to appreciate those who are my superiors. So have I, when I find them. I am beginning to think, however, that you men are very much alike. All you ask is a pretty face, for you all think that you have brains enough for two. But bring your paragon and introduce him, that I may share in your gaping admiration. You would indeed, my dear cuz, yawn over his conversation, for you couldn't understand half of it. I think we had better remain where we are till your shadow returns, with his eyes and nose slightly inflamed. He is aware of at least one method of becoming a spirited youth, it seems. A man whose is worth $500,000 is usually regarded as rather substantial, she retorted. Yes, but in this case the money bags outweigh the man too ridiculously. For heaven's sake, cuz, do not make a spectacle of yourself by marrying this attenuation, or society will assert there was a regularly drawn bill of sale. That means he, bought her. I assure you that I do not intend to put myself under any man's thumb for a long time to come. I am having too good a time. And that reminds me that I would enjoy meeting your friend with more than listening to much more than listening to your more cynical speeches. Did I not know that you were like my little King Charles, all bark rather than bite? I wouldn't stand them, and I won't any longer tonight. So go, bring your great embryo artist, or he will become one of the old masters before I see him. I fear I must give you a wee bit of bite this time. I've offered to introduce him, and he declines the honor. How is that? She asked, flushing with anger. I will quote his words exactly, and then you can interpret them as you think best. He said, I could not speak civilly to a lady that I had just seen giggling and flirting through one of Beethoven's finest symphonies. The young girl's face looked anything but amiable in response to this speech. But after a moment she tossed her head and replied, Non importa. There are plenty who can use not only civil words, but complimentary ones. Yeah, and the mischief of it is that you will listen to them, and not to others. So what sort of muscle can one make who lives only on sugar plums? They agree with me better than the vinegar drops you and your unmannerly friend delight in. I don't believe he ever painted anything better than a wooden squaw for one of your beloved cigar shops. Welcome back, Mr. Minty. You have been away an unconsciously long time. Thank you for the compliment of being missed. I've tried to make amends by ordering a petit souper for 3, for I am sure your cousin would join us. It will be brought to one of yonder stalls where, while we enjoy it, we can both see and hear. Surmising that the viands would consist of the choicest delicacies of the season, Stanton readily accepted the invitation. And it so happened that the cloth was laid for the party in the stall next to that in which Van Berg was quietly enjoying a cigar and a frugal glass of a frugal glass of something that was not water. They took their places quite unaware of his proximity, and he listened with considerable interest to the tones and words of the fair stranger who had so unexpectedly taken possession of his thoughts. Were it not for the slight shrillness and loudness at times, and the fashionable affectation of the day, her voice would have been sweet and girlish enough. As it was, it suggested an instrument tuned to a false key, and consequently discordant with all true and womanly harmonies. Her conversation with young Minty was as insipid as himself, but occasionally Stanton's cynical banter evoked something like a repartee and wit. In the course of her talk, she said, By the way, Ike, Mother and I start for the country next week. We are to spend the summer at the lake house, which is up the Hudson somewhere. You know where better than I. If you will bring your bays and a light wagon, I shall be very glad to see you there. Otherwise, I shall welcome you, well, as my cousin. Well, if I come, I will surely bring my bays, and possibly may invite you to drive with me. Oh, I will save you all trouble in that respect by inviting myself, when so inclined. The orchestra was now about to give a selection that Van Berg wished to hear to better advantage than he could in his present position. Therefore, unobserved by the party on the other side of the thin partition, he returned to his old seat in the main hallway. Not long after, Stanton with his cousin and Mr. Minty entered from the promenade, and again Van Berg received the same vivid impression of beauty, and, with many others, could not withdraw his eyes from the exquisite features that were slightly flushed with champagne and excitement. But as before, this impression passed quickly, and the face again became as exasperating to the artist as the visions of the Venus of Milo would be should some vandal hand pencil upon it a leer or a smirk. A heavy frown was gathering upon his brow when the young lady, happening to turn suddenly, caught and fully recognized his lowering expression. It accorded only too well with her cousin's words in regard to Van Berg's estimate of herself, and greatly increased her resentment towards the one who had already wounded her vanity, the most vulnerable and sensitive trait in her character. The flush that deepened so suddenly upon her face was unmistakably that of anger. She promptly turned her back upon her critic, nor did she look towards him again until the close of the evening. That his words and manner rankled in her memory, however, was proved by a slightly preoccupied manner, followed by fits of gaiety not altogether natural, and chiefly by the fact that she could not leave the place without a swift glance at the disturbing cause of her wonted self-approval. But Van Berg took pains to manifest his indifference by standing with his back towards her, when she knew that he must be aware of her departure, from her slightly ostentatious leave-taking of her cousin, in which, of course, the spoiled beauty had no other object than to attract attention to herself. As Van Berg with his friend was passing out a few minutes later, he asked rather abruptly, showing that he also was not so indifferent as he pretended to be, "What is your cousin's name, Stanton?"
"Well, her name is as pretty as herself, Ida Mayhew, and it is worse than a disquieting ghost in a good many heads and hearts that I know of. Indeed, its owner has robbed men that I thought sensible, not only of their peace, but I should say of their wits also. I had one friend of whom I thought a great deal, and it was pitiable to see the abject state to which the heartless little minx reduced him. I'm glad to find her witchery has no spell for you, and that you detect just what she is through her disguise of beauty. Also, no, Van, I will tell you a secret. I was once so head over heels in love with her myself, but you see my cousinly relationship enabled me to see her so often and intimately that she kind of cured me of my folly on homeopathic principles. Even the blindness of love could not fail to discover that when one subtracted vanity, coquetry, and her striking external beauty from Ida Mayhew, but little was left, and that little not a heavenly compound. Those who know her least, and who add to her beauty many ideal perfections, are the ones that rave about her most. I doubt whether she ever had a heart. If so, it was frittered away long ago in her numerous flirtations. But with all her folly, she has ever had the sense to keep within the conventionalities of her own fashionable coterie, which is the only world she knows anything about, and whose unwritten laws are her only creed and religion. Her disappointed suitors, I can justly charge her with cruelty, silliness, ignorance, and immeasurable vanity, but never with indiscretion. She has to perfection the American girl's ability to take care of herself, and no man will see twice to take a liberty beyond that which etiquette permits. I have now given you in brief, the true character of Ida Mayhew. It is no secret, for all who come to know her well arrive at the same opinion. When I saw you had observed her this evening for the first time, I was quite interested in watching the impression she would make upon you. I'm very glad that your judgment has been both good and prompt, for I slightly feared that your love of beauty might make you blind to everything else."
Stanton's concluding words were as incense to Van Berg, for he prided himself in no slight degree on his even pulse and sensible heart that, thus far, had given him so little trouble, and he therefore replied with a certain tinge of complacency and consciousness of security, "You know me well enough, Ike, to be aware that I am becoming almost
a monomaniac in my art. A woman's face is to me a little more than a picture which I analyze from an artistic standpoint. A merely pretty face is like a line of verse of musical rhythm, but without sense or meaning. This is bad and provoking enough, but when the most exquisite features give expression only to some of the meanest and unworthiest qualities that can infest a woman's soul, one is exasperated almost beyond endurance. At least I am, for I am offended in my strongest instincts. I think of employing stately Homeric words and measure in describing a belle's toilette table in its rouge pots, goodness, I was like, what are you talking about? In its rouge pots, false hair, and other abominations. Much worse is it, in my estimation, that the features of a goddess should tell us only of moral vermin like vanity and silliness, and the egotism of poor little self that thinks of nothing, and knows nothing save its own small cravings. Okay, pardon me, I am not speaking of your cousin, but in the abstract. In regard to that young lady, as you saw, I was very much struck with the face. Indeed, to tell the honest truth, I never saw so much beauty spoiled before. And the fact has put me in so bad a humor that you, no doubt, are glad I have reached my corner, and so I must say good night. Yeah, well, Ida Mayhew, she can realize all such abstractions, muttered Ike Stanton, as he walked on alone. The reader will be apt to surmise, however, that some resentment, resulting from his former and unrequited sentiment towards the girl, gave an unjust bias to his judgment.